What's going on, guys? Welcome back to another edition of Talking Ball. It's Jack, and today I wanted to go over this Final Four, a little Final Four preview for you guys, because I think this could be a historic Final Four. And one data point that points to that is in the Kenpom era, since 2002. There have been, what is that, 23 seasons now. Um, there's never been a season with four or more teams with net ratings of 34 and above. All four of these teams have net ratings of 35 and above. Florida, Auburn, Houston, and Duke. And not only that, but there's never been a season with two or more teams with net ratings of 34 and above. So these teams are the elite of the elite, and if you put them in other years, they would probably be the best team in that given year. For some context, for you guys who may not be as familiar with Kenpom, it's the adjusted efficiency margin. And last year, Connecticut, which was far and away the best team in the country, their net efficiency margin was above 36, which is right in line with Houston this year, the second best team in net efficiency per Kenpom. These four teams were the best four teams for the majority of this season, and I think it's great. I know there weren't a ton of upsets, but I think it's great that they made it to the Final Four and we get to see these matchups. Now, JD and I will be having the full Duke versus Houston preview this Wednesday, early evening, late evening. Sometime we'll get that out for you guys. So be on the lookout for that. Please like this video, subscribe to the channel. It really helps us grow, and drop a comment. What do you expect to see at the Final Four this year? So I got a couple questions and a couple things to go over. Spend a little bit more time on the Auburn-Florida game than the Duke-Houston game, so we're going to have a complete breakdown of that game. But the first one, does the SEC dominance depend on them winning the championship this year? Obviously, they're going to have a team in the final, with it being either Auburn or Florida. And they had 14 teams, which is a record. They crushed the old record of 11 by the Big East. And it was 14 of 16 teams from the conference. They had 8 teams in the round of 32, 7 in the round of 16, 4 in the Elite Eight, and now 2 in the Final Four. And these have been the two best teams in the SEC. So rightfully so, Auburn and Florida. And, I think some people may bring that up. They may say they need to win the championship to justify their dominance. I don't think that's the case. I think they've already proved it with their performance thus far, and just getting a team to the final is enough. If Houston or Duke were to beat them in the championship game, I think it would just mean that Houston or Duke were just the most dominant team or the best team, depending on how the game goes. So I think that question, I've seen that question posed in other places. I just think they've proved it enough. This was an awesome season by the SEC. Now, I think a lot of people expect this to continue next year. They did get a lot of money from their performance in the NCAA tournament. I'm not so sure. I don't think we're going to see such a dominant SEC next year. Do I think they will have, 8 teams in the tournament, 7 to 9 teams in the tournament? Sure. But I think the ACC is going to be much better next year. I could see the Big East being a little bit better. So I don't think it will be quite the same next season. The next question we got to talk about: how does the Janai Broome injury affect the Auburn-Florida matchup? I think it has a big impact, guys. I really do. He did not look good. He was, let me get myself oriented here. He's left-handed. Thankfully, it was his right elbow, but he was reaching over his right arm. You guys saw late in that Auburn-Michigan State game to give high fives. His arm was kind of like dangling down. The way he fell, too, just looked really awkward. My hope, now they did do x-rays. Everything was negative. My hope is that it was maybe a stinger. It really hurt or didn't feel comfortable in the moment. But hopefully with 5 or 6 days of rest here, he'll be good to go. Because the way Auburn had played, especially the last two games, I would say. The Michigan game, they really got it going in the second half, and I thought they started off strong against Michigan State. They looked like the Auburn team from the majority of the season, not the team we saw in the last handful of games before the end of the regular season. And most importantly, their defense was back. And that was really the thing that wasn't as great. I know they played some great teams. Their losses were to awesome competition. Texas A&M, Alabama, and I believe it was Tennessee off the top of my head here. So they didn't lose to anybody bad, right? Two of those teams were in the Elite Eight. But they didn't look like the Auburn team that we'd seen that was really dominant most of the season. I thought they were back. I was prepared to pick them in this game. I got to hear what happens with Johni Broome before I really settle on a prediction for this game. But as of right now, with thinking that he's not going to be healthy, I am going to side with Florida. And before I go into that game a little bit more detail, I'm sure some of you guys have seen this year. So before this year, there were only two players who had played on a Final Four on two different teams. This year, there are now three more. So there's a total of 5 players, 3 players that happened with this year. Mason Gillis, who was on Purdue last year, he's on Duke this season. We've got Elijah Martin, who was on that FAU team from 2 years ago, who went on a tremendous run to the Final Four, almost to the championship game. And then LJ Cryer, who is a part of the Baylor team that won in 2021. And so all 3 of them are now back in the Final Four, but on a different team. I do think this trend will continue. I don't think necessarily there's going to be 3 players next year, but I wouldn't be surprised if there's another one next year, or if there isn't one next year, there will be another guy a year from then, because just with the amount of player movement, it just seems likely that this is going to continue to happen. All right, so last theme here, Florida and Auburn. This is a revenge game. It's a little bit similar in the Duke-Houston matchup, although not from the same season. Florida beat Auburn at Auburn 90-81 without Elijah Martin, who's one of their leading scorers and just a tremendous player. They were up by as many as 20 points in the second half, and Urban Klavsar was 3 of 3 from 3 for Florida. He's been out of the rotation as of late. I don't expect him to play much in this game against Auburn, but I do think that kind of balances out, not completely, but kind of balances out the fact that Martin wasn't there. When you get that kind of performance from Klavsar, I think this game is going to be decided by the guards. I know a lot of the talk will be on Johni Broome and how he matches up with the Florida bigs and Alex Condon and Thomas Haw, and who's been tremendous in this tournament, I should say, and Ruben Chinyelu and Micah Hanlockton. But I think this matchup really comes down to the guards, and I think Florida's guards really outplayed Auburn's guards as a whole, and that's going to be the matchup. The 4 guards for Auburn, when you're talking about Denver Jones, Miles Kelly, Chad Baker-Mazara, and Tahad Pettiford, versus the 4 main guards for Florida, looking at Walter Clayton, Elijah Martin, Will Richard, and Denzel Aberdeen. And I think that's where this game's going to be decided. Can guys like Pettiford get close to matching, what Walter Clayton is going to do? It's going to take another big game performance from Tahad Pettiford, which he's shown quite the ability to do several times this season. And that's what it's going to take for them to beat Florida. I think Florida is the rightful slight favorite in this one, especially with the Broome injury. And I think it's going to be a great game to start the Final Four. Now, with Duke and Houston, like I said, it's probably going to be a 40-minute breakdown coming for you guys Wednesday. So be on the lookout for that. But the one thing I will say right now is that this is a revenge game for Houston. 4 of those players at least were a part of the rotation last year. When you talk about Juwan Roberts, LJ Cryer, Emmanuel Sharp, and Javier Francis. Obviously, Duke beat Houston in the Sweet 16 last year. Jamal Shed goes down 8 to 10 minutes into that one, and that certainly had a big changed the outcome of that game, or had a big impact on the outcome, I should say. And this year, they've replaced him with Uzan, who's a better offensive player, not nearly the defender that Shed is, but they have a top 10, all four of these teams, top 10 offense, top 10 defense. That's why their net ratings are so high. And you look at this Houston team, Joseph Tugler and Terrence Arsenault were injured for that game last year. On the Duke side, only Proctor played in that game. Caleb Foster was hurt for that game on the Duke side. So it's basically a completely new Duke team, and there's a lot of familiar faces, at least, on the Houston team. So we'll be breaking that all down for you guys Wednesday. This is going to be a fun week ahead of the Final Four, and we'll be covering as much as we can here at Talking Ball. We'll see you guys soon.